Katie Geilenkirchen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And I'm so impressed that you pronounced my last name correctly.
Yes, I pronounce it in German because I really
Mm-hmm.
don't know how to pronounce it in English. How do your compatriots call you?
We say Geilenkirchen. Yeah, so it's pronounced just how it looks, but the German that you sounded perfect. Yes.
Thank you. But is the name from Germany or Austria or Switzerland?
German. There's a town in Germany of the same name. And I think there's an Air Force base there, maybe. So, yep, German. Yeah. I'm very German.
And it has a big yellow church.
Yes.
That's what your name means.
Golden, gilded or something.
Geilenkirchen means a yellow church.
Okay. Some people have told me that there's also like a bad word.
No, it's not a bad word, actually. Geil. But geil basically it's a kind of utility word. You can use it for anything. And the modern German just uses this for, that's cool.
Oh,
but it can also mean hot or horny or yellow or it's just, it's really hot, If something is very hip or it's sehr geil.
Oh, okay. Well, I like that.
No, it's not a bad word at all, especially not in conjunction with the word church.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's very chaste.
As things having to do with church usually are.
And it's a geile church, so it must be a really cool church.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
The things we are talking about today are Seedy Enough. What Women Want.
Seedy Enough.
The movie.
Indeed. Good segue.
Thank you. I pride myself on good segues. That doesn't automatically mean I make good ones, but we are talking today about What Women Want, and it's a Mel Gibson movie where Mel Gibson, in the person of Nick Marshall, electrocutes himself and becomes clairvoyant. So clairvoyant, in fact, he can hear women's thoughts. And like any great humanitarian, he uses this for sex and to make his job easier. So,
of course.
When was the last time you watched this movie?
Before rewatching it for the pod, the 20 or so years ago that it came out was the last time I watched it.
Yeah,
so
same for me.
Only vaguely recalled it.
You always recall the premise because the premise is really good.
Mm-hmm.
That you can kind of guess why this movie would always have been made, because the premise is great. It's like, what if a man could hear a woman's thoughts? So I guess today we talk about what they actually did with it. What was your impression?
Well, first I'll preface by saying I am not a fan ordinarily of rom-coms. And I would definitely classify this as your stereotypical romantic comedy. It's very formulaic, right? This ball-busting, very powerful woman. There's this sexual tension with this very, very typical womanizing man, and they fall in love, right? So
over the top,
formulaic.
The top man's man.
Yes.
I mean, so over the top, it really is kind of, it puts you off right away. At least it did me. I lost suspension of disbelief even before he became clairvoyant.
That's true.
He grew up, his mother was a Las Vegas showgirl.
Mm-hmm.
And he grew up basically being idolized by empty-headed, beautiful women. And
mostly
that's his
naked,
childhood.
too.
That's all we're told about him. And through the perspective of his ex-wife, she tells this in a kind of scathing way because she's divorced and she's getting married. But I found it kind of peculiar that she's on her wedding day talking to her bridesmaids, not about her future husband. No, she's talking about the ex-husband.
Yeah, very interesting exposition, right? I mean, it's just, you're right. It is over the top, and it's like a product of its time, perhaps. But having said all that, I actually didn't mind this movie. I liked it more than I thought I was going to like it. And partially because a couple of things. It was like reminiscing, because I'm seeing all these actors that at the time I didn't know who they were, most likely, but it's pretty star-studded.
Absolutely.
Now, the people, almost everyone is notable in it. So partially that.
It's got Alan Alda.
Oh, who doesn't love Alan Alda?
Who doesn't love Alan?
I love Marissa Tomei.
Lauren
Oscar
winner. Helen Hunt.
The ex-wife. Yeah, obviously Mel and Helen, Judy Greer, Delta Burke, Mark Feuerstein, Sarah Paulson, Anna Gasteyer, Loretta Devine, Lisa Edelstein. I mean, it goes on. And the daughter, who I didn't recognize her name. So Mel's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever watch Growing Pains when you were a kid?
Yes.
She played Chrissy.
Yep.
In Growing Pains. So
I did notice.
Yeah.
Yep. I did like the show. It was one of those sitcoms back in the day that you just watched because there was really, you only had 3 or 4 channels. So that's the only thing you could watch.
True.
You kind of were forced to watch it, kind of like Golden Girls. It was always on. And watch Growing
don't
Pains.
knock Golden Girls. I love Golden Girls. It's so good. I love it.
Estelle Getty fan in the house, eh?
Well, she's probably my least, but the other 3, they were kind of trailblazers. I mean, they were all really big proponents of like animal welfare, animal rights, gay and lesbian rights, like racial equality. Like they were all very into causes. So
I find that a little bit suspect about actors, to be honest, because they all seem to have a cause.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure how it works in the United States, but here in Holland, our celebrities, our singers, our TV presenters, they all have a cause and they all have a personal foundations. They're tax-free. So I suspect that most of those things are just tax shelters. And well, it does give them a nice platform to virtue signal and to stay in the news. And
I hear you. I guess I romanticize the past, perhaps. And so I think of it as a simpler time. So back in the 80s, I guess, but I've read all of their memoirs and Rue McClanahan, B. Arthur, and Betty White, who just recently passed. So I'm big fans of them as people and actresses. So anyway.
They seem like decent people.
Yes. But
basically what we're talking about here is a movie directed by a woman. Not just any woman, but at the time, around the year 2000, probably the most influential woman in Hollywood. We're talking about Nancy Meyers.
Mm-hmm.
She'd been around for decades. She was the woman who wrote Private Benjamin. Have you seen that movie?
I have, but it's been...
Well, we're talking 1981.
The year I was born.
It's been a while, but it's influential. So basically throughout the 80s, she would write scripts and she became known as what's called the rom-com queen. So, I dragged you into one of her best movies because this movie made a lot of money, ridiculous amounts of money. I looked it up and it is around over 300 million, which for the time is a lot of money for a comedy. They don't make that much money. So here we have a woman director making a rom-com, which is her forte, working with Mel Gibson, who's no slouch when it comes to comedy. Off we go. Now it gets interesting because Mel Gibson is, somewhat toxic in this movie.
Only in this movie. Oh, okay.
Well,
kidding, sort of.
I get it. This movie is convoluted. I don't know if you noticed, but it has a lot of superfluous storylines. It's long. It's 2 hours long. I felt it was a really long sit through, and I could have done without the suicide coworker. I get it because basically the character Nick Marshall is just such an asshole that we need somehow to redeem him. And the best way to do that if you just save someone from the ledge, right? So here's a suicidal coworker, and he can hear her thoughts. And throughout the movie, they sort of sprinkle in that, she's not very happy with herself. But ironically, in the end, she was never going to do anything about it anyway. From the looks of it, she's going to get a promotion out of it. But it does make Nick look in a more favorable light. And then you have the other storyline, which is all that stuff with his daughter. Because at the start of the movie, it's obvious that he's deadbeat dad. He can't even remember his daughter's age, and basically scares off her boyfriend and knows exactly what that boyfriend is about because that's exactly who he is. He's basically, by modern terms, he's a predator. And as soon as he can start hearing women's thoughts, he becomes even worse. I mean, that poor coffee girl.
I know. I almost forgot, like I thought the movie had forgotten, like he starts to turn around. There's a point in which we kind of start to turn our favor about Nick. I will say in that I on the runtime, I'll just say, I don't mind a long movie. And 2 hours, I don't really consider long, considering the 3 hours that we get sometimes.
Well, it depends. I mean, this is a comedy with not much of a good plot.
Well,
so that is a long sit through.
Therefore, I do think that those subplots are needed, because otherwise it's really paper thin. I mean, it's just the formula and that's it. And so it would be there'd be like literally no meat on the bones, in my opinion, if not for us seeing some of his interchanges with his daughter and like kind of we come around to him. We see that he's taking a bigger interest in her. And same with the coworker who feels ignored. And she had asked for a chance at a job. And as it turns out, he completely ignored her and he didn't even remember that. So I kind of like those subplots. It helps show us that he's turning that corner.
But did he need it?
I think so.
Okay. Because I don't think the coffee girl plot line worked. Because he comes off as an even bigger asshole than mine.
I agree.
Because basically she says, well, we had like this earth moving sex, because you can hear her thoughts and just basically color the lines. And so it's after 6 days of not hearing from him. I mean, why didn't he call her? What's his problem? So he was just cutting another notch, right? So after 6 days, she basically stalks him at his apartment for hours, and he talks to her, and she's basically like filling in like, oh, you must be gay. That's it, right? You're gay, right? And he's like going along with it. He basically lied to her. I mean, he could have like come up with something decent, or he could have told the truth. Hey, you know what? I can just hear your thoughts. I'm kind of like a superhero. Instead of doing good with it, I'm, doing evil with it by having sex with you. He could have said that to her. I mean, he could have come clean like he did to Helen Hunt.
I wondered the same. And still am a little perplexed what that particular storyline was confusing to me. Like it didn't move anything along. It in fact showed us that he's truly at the heart of it a jerk, because as he's falling in love with Helen Hunt, we see early in the movie, he goes to this coffee shop every day and asks her out. And she's very into him. She finds him very attractive, as he learns when he can read her thoughts. And she says no. She repeatedly turns him down because she's afraid of getting hurt. And she tells him as much. And then he convinces her to go out with him anyway. He uses his power.
Her thoughts, her vulnerabilities against her.
And then, so I was wondering when we're supposed to start turning around with him. I wondered the same thing. I'm like, well, what about Marissa Tomei? Like, and then there she is. Like, as soon as I was thinking that, there she is. And I was very disappointed in how that turned out. So what do you think the purpose of that storyline was?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because it's not making him likable.
No.
Well, it is showing his prowess, and it's showing the effectiveness of his clairvoyance. I mean, here's a woman who's been rebuffing him for probably months, if not a few years. And for good reason. Her instincts are exactly spot on. She's correct. He's a dick. Stay away from this guy.
Yeah.
And, don't sleep with your customers, and, you name it. And so he reads her mind, gets what he needs from it, talks her into bed, has sex with her. The sex is great. And that's all to, make him feel better about himself. It's not about her. The fact that she has an orgasm is more of a trophy than it is of any use. So,
and it takes him a while. I'll just, like, on that note, I thought, I don't really know why the sex scene, he really struggles at first getting it together, even with being able to read her mind. Like, she's like, oh my God, hurry up already so I can fake it and this be over.
Yes,
and he's like, oh crap, I'm losing. Yeah. And then eventually he pulls it together. But like, so I don't know why they showed us that he struggled so much at first.
Yeah, in my opinion, it backfires. It makes him irredeemable. That's kind of the way I feel about it. And I that's how I feel about him as a character. When you look at the climax, where he's lost his superpower. He basically comes clean. The woman in question is like, yeah, but I fell in love with you anyway. So, and here's another thing that really bothered me about this whole thing. She tells him about how she got divorced. I mean, she had a disaster of a marriage. She was barely married. She obviously shouldn't have married him anyway. I think it was one of those, what we Europeans call American marriages, where
do tell.
Boy meets girl, usually in the workplace. A boy and girl start dating. They date once, they date twice. On the third date, boy proposes to girl. They have a wonderful, very expensive wedding at the expense of her father, usually in a garden setting. And that's when they start to actually get to know each other post-wedding.
Okay.
Because I have American friends who do that, and who are like in their fourth marriage, etc.
Oh.
And it's just painful to watch. And after the fourth time, it's like, well, I'm going to do a little bit different this time. And it's like, well,
yeah, it does seem like some people really like that. I know some people that way too. They love falling in love. And
yes, and it's been explained to me that it's the Christian fundamental streak in the United States, that it's frowned upon to have sex before marriage. So the sooner you get married, the quicker you can jump into bed together without any guilt associated with it. So that's why these marriages are so quick.
Oh, interesting. I really don't know very many real religious people. So
yes, but in terms of not being religious, but it's seeped into the culture. It's just considered frowned upon to date for a prolonged amount of time. Why would you? Why not just get married? Everybody wants you to get married.
Oh, that's so interesting, because I'm like, why would you get married? I have the opposite feeling, but interesting that okay. So she has that type of marriage.
Yes.
And obviously
she's divorced within 9 months.
Yeah.
And her conclusion is, he didn't love me. Well, honey, you were probably right about that. You never should have married that guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
1, never sleep with a coworker. 2, never marry a coworker.
A lot of people do meet that way.
Not if you're going to keep working in the same place. I mean, that's a recipe for disaster. So she's basically telling him, I'm not much of a manager of my personal life, so don't worry about it. I'm not much of a manager for your job, because basically she's his superior. And they go past all kinds of professional boundaries in the first few days. Yeah. So she's making the same mistake again.
Even worse so. I found the ending to be a little odd too. Also extremely unrealistic, but rom-coms are not known to be. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm going too far with the ending. But essentially she ends up firing him.
Rightfully so.
Yeah. But so we think she's pissed. He comes clean, sort of. And, she has this look on her face, like she's very touched by it. And then the surprise, she fires him. He walks out, and then she goes after him. Well, where are you going? You're giving up so soon or something. And then turns out, oh, I love you. And
yes, she fired him basically so they could have a relationship, because she has a learning curve, and she learned, don't date colleagues.
And then he's just okay with that. And his character, there is no way that this person would be great, I lost my job, but I get the girl. He'd be screw the girl, I want my job. How's
he going to pay for that ridiculously expensive apartment?
I know. Also, it's a trope in rom-coms. Everybody is an ad guy, right? It's always an ad agency. Why do
they have, high-paying jobs, and there's a reason why they're so charismatic and handsome.
I know a lot of agency people. I work in marketing, and we all avoid agencies like the plague, because they will work you to death and not pay you much. So you nowadays, I know this was 2000, but nowadays people kind of steer clear of agencies. It doesn't have the sex
cachet
and slick nature that it used to.
Yeah, it's over for the madmen, isn't it?
Yes.
Too bad for Don Draper.
I know.
Yeah. That brings me to another thing, ad related. That office. How awesome was that office building?
It was pretty cool. Also, the movie is set in Chicago, which is one of my favorite cities. Have you been to Chicago?
Once, just the once.
Did you like it?
I went there in winter.
Oh, so probably not.
I'm sure it's really nice in summer.
It's wonderful in the summer, but Chicago. I love Chicago. So, cool. And they're known for architecture. So it doesn't surprise me that their office building is super cool.
Yes, although it's very ambiguous in the movie, at least, because you sort of guess it's Chicago because they have 30s music starting off with it. And I guess Americans recognize the buildings.
Did they not explicitly say it?
No.
Ever?
Oh, no, I purposely watched the movie again to check.
Okay.
You just sort of have to guess. Otherwise, it could be any big city.
Yeah.
Could have been Seattle. It rained a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
New York.
Oh, interesting. Because the opening sequence shows the skyline through. It was kind of a cool, like through the newspaper van or truck. So that's how we see the skyline. So yeah, I suppose that's how Americans would recognize it. But
yes, but this was an immense worldwide success. I mean, it did about 150, 160 domestic, and the rest of the money, the 300 plus, was earned overseas. So I guess the rest of the world really enjoyed hearing what women think.
That aspect of it was
because that is the big draw of the movie. Not the rom-com, not the romance. None of that works. Not awesome Nick Marshall. That doesn't work. The idea of that you can Martians can hear the thoughts of the Venetians.
Ah, good one. Well, so what did you think about that? Did you feel like, so obviously that was a marketing ploy to use that to get people butts in seats.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel
like it was never explored? It was used for comic relief. And ironically, that's how I remember the movie, because there's one joke in there, one gag that is so funny to me. It's not funny anymore because I've seen it, but it works the first time and it really floors me. And that's when he's in the park and he hears all these women screaming in his head. And then there's the French poodle who's jumping up against his owner saying, "Monsieur, I need to poop." And I just laugh every time. That is just so funny to me that he even hears dogs.
A female dog. Yeah, I actually don't recall that part.
It's great. They worked a poop joke in there. And that's just, I just love that. And that kind of, that makes the movie special for me.
So what you're saying is men are perpetually 12-year-old boys?
I think so, yes. I sure am.
Okay. It's not news to me, just confirmation.
Well, I'm happy to confirm that. What also drew me to the movie, that's not overt, but it's something I think Mel and his producer / writer / director, Nancy Meyers, probably discussed beforehand, is the classic feel to everything. It really feels like a classic American movie, a truly classic American movie from the 30s, 40s, 50s. And the whole movie breathes that. You know, the way it's paced and the way the characters are written. And I think the only difference is the jokes are a little bit more modern. The dialogue is faster and quippier if you compare it to the movies they based it on. And
interesting.
Yes. And because I watched a lot of that stuff when I was a child, because my grandma loved those movies. And whenever I spent time at my grandparents' house, they make me watch those movies inevitably because, you know, as a child, I did not have control over the remote. They had control of the remote.
Of course.
During the day, when I'd be done with my chores, I could watch TV with my grandma, but we'd watch what she wanted to watch. And she was like knitting, and we'd watch one of those old movies. And same with my grandfather. If I was done with something, then he would watch soccer inevitably. I could, you know, it doesn't matter if it was Battlestar Galactica night. It doesn't matter. There's soccer on. We're watching soccer. I had 9 grandparents from the 19th century. So children,
I think those are
not heard.
Yeah, no, yes. I actually think those are nice memories. Don't like that you can look back on watching those things with your grandparents. So,
definitely.
Yeah, yes. And it introduced you to something more classic and less superficial.
Well, there's an irony there because those movies were intensely superficial.
Yes, true. That's a good point.
Yes, because those were the post-war, the kind of the during the war and post-war movies were an escapism for everyone who was in the war. So it was all hunky-dory. That's probably what drew my grandparents to it, because they were very, now we would call it PTSD, but they were very traumatized by what happened to them in the war. They lost a child. So yeah, well, because Holland was occupied by Germany. So we really suffered in the occupation. So whatever they went through, they did not want to go through in their heads all the time. So they would
like realism, yeah,
find escapism in these kinds of movies. And I suspect that Hollywood produced the movies they produced in the 50s, in the 30s as well, 30s, 40s, and 50s, with a kind of innocence, with a kind of guileless, really. It never
definitely
really had a very strong point. They were almost flimsy. Those were the movies of my childhood. So I remember all those actors and actresses. Now watching this movie, you see some of the same kind of superficiality with an edge to it. I don't know if you noticed that.
I didn't notice a similar beat to the movie. I didn't sense that. However, the themes you had mentioned that the director had kind of based this movie loosely on kind of the love affair between and the movies of Katherine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy.
Yes. And it turns out the director was a really, really, really big fan of that.
So you had mentioned that, and I didn't realize, you helped me learn a little bit more about their love affair. And so reading about it, and I didn't realize they'd done 9 films together.
Amazing.
I've only seen 2. I had once upon a time seen Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And then I watched Adam's Rib last night.
Right.
And so after, learning about that, I can kind of retroactively go back and think of it through that lens. I think there's less similarity between the theme of the movie, but I noted a lot of similarity between the actors, Spencer Tracy and Mel Gibson. Definitely. They seem very similar. Yes. They're both religious Catholics and tortured souls and depressed and alcoholics and known as heartthrobs of their time. That really baffles me, actually, for both of them. I don't see it for either actor, but I guess the theme of the movies I found, at least with Adam's Rib, I don't know about the other movies, I had found that it's actually a little bit flipped. In that Katherine Hepburn is this very strong actress on the surface. She even wins the court case, but then
this is Adam's Rib we're talking about.
Yes, Adam's Rib. She even
and the plot to that is
sorry.
What was that?
It's 2 well-to-do lawyers. He's the ADA in New York, and she has her own law firm. They end up representing opposite sides of a attempted murder case. Yeah, so she's on the defense. He's obviously prosecuting, and she wins. And she, is using this feminism, which at the time was probably pretty groundbreaking. I think it was in the 40s, 1942, I want to say.
Yes.
But then there's a weird neighbor romance. I didn't really understand what that was all about. That the neighbor thing was weird. But at the end, she does have to, in order to keep him, she kind of has to play second fiddle. And so I just thought, which is the opposite of what happened in What Women Want. So the roles were reversed a little bit.
Yes. And the interesting thing is that I think that's basically the Katherine Hepburn influence, because Katherine Hepburn was such a strong personality and such a big influence on the movie. Katherine Hepburn is unique. The woman won 4 Oscars in her career, which makes her the greatest actress of all time. People talk about Meryl Streep, and the people who talk about Meryl Streep have no conception of how good, Katherine Hepburn really was. And at very early stages, she started producing herself, which is another interesting element, because that's what Mel Gibson does and has also started doing. at a very early stage in his career. So there are a lot of similarities here, and it kind of makes you wonder that wasn't a very conscious choice, because Mel Gibson obviously grew up with these movies. I've seen interviews where he talks about, because he has a lot of brothers and sisters, where the entire family would be in front of their little black and white TV watching all this old stuff. So I suspect Dick Tracy is a big influence on his career, is probably to a large extent the reason why he became an actor in the first place. He probably molded himself after him, and rightfully so, because Dick Tracy
that would make sense.
One of the most respected actors ever.
Do you mean Spencer Tracy?
Spencer Tracy. Who's Dick Tracy? Dick Tracy is a character. Sorry.
Yeah.
I get confused.
I knew what you meant.
But yes, so that's kind of interesting. They don't talk about it in depth. Neither Nancy Meyers nor Mel Gibson actually admit to this. But I think these movies that Hepburn and Tracy made, and the major influence their personality as people had on all those movies, made a big imprint on them, and as a result have a large influence on, and kind of cast a shadow over this movie. Because a lot of the things that might not really work are a result of perhaps the desire of the producers to perhaps live through that, experience some of this. For example, the affair that Katherine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy had, which wasn't an affair because that was a relationship that lasted decades, but because Spencer Tracy didn't want to get divorced and Katherine Hepburn didn't want to get married again, it was kind of a relationship of convenience. Everybody knew about it. I mean, it wasn't, you couldn't deny it. But somehow the Hollywood press never wrote about it, and the movie studios made sure it was kept quiet. And so it was a public secret.
Yeah. Can you imagine that happening now, though? That Impossible. It wouldn't be in the tabloids all the time?
Impossible.
Yeah.
I think Hollywood is a different business now. It thrives on these kinds of relationships and this kind of nonsense. I mean, Kim Kardashian, when she farts, it's turned into a whole week of episodes for her show.
Yeah, I do not watch.
You don't have to.
I know what you mean. Yeah, you can become famous for not having talent to speak of. So not like singing, acting, dancing, what have you, as in the past, just being like pretty in a sex tape.
Yeah, Kim is famous for being famous because she's not actually attractive. She's not an attractive woman. She's completely
Most people
fabricated.
Would probably disagree with you, but yeah, it's like very fake.
Nothing is real about her.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. I would imagine that if you pull...
It baffles me that she's been famous, quote unquote, for 20 years.
I know.
Has made untold millions. I think it's because she's the right person for what the industry is now.
Oh, for sure.
And there are women who could be Katherine Hepburn, but they would not have the place that Katherine Hepburn made for herself, because she's a self-made woman, and she was a huge influence on all those Hollywood movies.
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting. I really enjoyed. So thank you for bringing it up. Like the learning about their love affair. I got to say, so two things. One is to bring it back to What Women Want is you also mentioned that the show Cheers, the TV sitcom Cheers, was also kind of based on those relationships, those movies, like that. And it is super stereotypical, but it's done well in Cheers, I think. So I found Cheers to be more reminiscent to like What Women Want was based on than like Adam's Rib or something, like that romance combined with antagonism that creates that sexual tension. Will they, won't they?
And I think, basically the relationships dynamics as they were in the 30s and 40s and 50s changed when Cheers came along in throughout the 80s, and they've changed again when this movie came out. And I think that's why we feel out of sorts with this movie, because you don't see any growth, and there's very little contemporary relationship values in this. They're a throwback. I mean, the very fact that this Nick Marshall grows up in kind of a mythical Las Vegas, with the showgirls and everything. I mean, that Las Vegas doesn't exist anymore.
No, not at all.
Even when I was there, it was already Disney.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I do romanticize old times. And so when I watch like mob movies and they talk about the old Vegas, I'm like, oh, I don't know. It's like, why am I romanticizing mobsters? Like, this is ridiculous. But yeah, I kind of like older things. It seems simpler, easier.
And to an extent, they did it better.
Yes.
That's also
maybe
true.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you? So I found it, and maybe this is because I'm a woman. I'm curious to see what your thoughts were. And granted, I just read some articles quickly, in like IMDb's of Katherine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. They were together for so long. Initially, she was immediately attracted to him, but he wasn't to her. He was actually annoyed by her. And like, so she must have grown on him over time. They developed this relationship. She would never leave him. Had he not died, she said he would.
I don't think a woman like Katherine Hepburn, I think it's impossible not to fall for her. She's a lioness.
But some men don't like that. And I don't
those are weak men.
Yeah, but
when you're a strong man, when you have very strong values, you break sheep, you break women who are weak. You never have a successful relationship with them.
Yeah.
You need a lioness. You need someone who stands up to you, who calls you on your bullshit. And instinctively, you need a woman like that because she makes you better. That's why whenever you see a strong politician or you see a great man, look who he's married to.
But in that time, like 40s, 50s, 60s, there was still this like subservient woman expectation seemingly. And obviously she's not going to have that is what I would think on
they
surface.
Were in those 40s movies, and especially the ones with Katherine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, they were really playing with that. The essence of the comedy was always the uppity woman and the man who knows best. And they were turning that on its ear because society had changed and everybody knew it. They were trying to go back to the old relationship model, but it wasn't working anymore because during the war, all the women were in the factories making the bombs and the planes and the guns, and they were moving out of the kitchen. So the dynamic was changing, and those movies, and especially the relationship between Hepburn and Tracy in those movies, and presumably outside, they reflect that. And I think that's why they were so popular. Because
I agree.
Everybody could recognize something in that.
I loved An Adam's Rib. It was in the 40s and they're cooking, they're rich. They have like housekeepers, but they're, you see them like preparing a meal together, and it's very unconventional in the movie. But what I was reading is that in real life, so ordinarily in every other aspect of her life, she was this very powerful, strong woman that won't take shit from anybody. But seemingly she did take shit from him. He was, according to accounts, like pretty emotionally and even in one case physically abusive towards her. And she said that she liked serving him, and her friends said she was a different person with him. And so that sort of disappointed me a little, that I didn't love hearing that, because I still wanted her to be like, strong in her relationship as well. And she even said, I honestly don't know how I was in love with him, but I'm not sure.
Never knew how he feel about her.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Well, it's pretty obvious that she has daddy issues. She needs a strong male figure in her life who does not give her enough affection, but who requires a lot of care and strife to get this affection. So it's, that's the dynamic of that relationship. She actually, she nursed him until his last hours. Despite that, she would sneak out the door so no one would know they had a relationship. Interesting woman. Very interesting woman.
She is, yeah.
Knew what she wanted,
style icon.
And she made sure she got it.
Yeah.
Because this is apparently what she wanted. We get the relationships we get because of the relationship we have with our parents and our parents had with each other, because those are our role models. And we either do the exact opposite or we end up doing the same thing. Yeah. But to a degree, we are chained to that. That is the reality of relationships. And also, I think when you look at this movie, What Women Want, I'm specifically talking about, we have a dysfunctional man. To an extent, he falls for another dysfunctional person. So one of the reasons there isn't a sequel is because there can't be a sequel, because I don't think they were ever married for very long. I don't think that would work.
No, I don't think so either.
You can see the plot. She, a successful executive, he out of work.
He falls apart.
He falls apart.
With no work, trying to,
Now, I've seen movies like that. I've seen rom-coms like that.
Yeah.
I suspect Nancy Meyer had something to do with that.
Yes. I did see several of those. Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah. It's interesting. So oddly enough, so there are a lot of holes in the movie, like tons of holes in the movie and like oddities. However, I didn't not enjoy watching it. It was just an easy watch. Don't have to think too hard. It's just
Nancy Meyers knows what she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Mel Gibson is funny. And so we get a really professional movie. It just doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah.
I think that's the reality of it. Because for me, as a man, who enjoys movies, maybe I'm too much of a geek. I like science fiction maybe a little bit too much, because the clairvoyance irks me. There is just too much wrong with it. The science does not compute.
It's like over the phone.
It's never explained. And what bothers me the most, every superhero tests his strength, right? Because this is a superpower. I'm thinking typically as a man here, this is a superpower. You can hear what women think. That's a superpower. Now, what does he do with it? He doesn't really do anything with it. Nothing useful anyway. If you could hear what other people think, would you end wars? Would you create a better society? Or would you just steal ad copy ideas from your coworkers because you are pissed you didn't get promoted? What is that?
As Nick Marshall did, yes.
As Nick Marshall did.
I'm curious to see what you would do with that superpower.
This character is basically something resembling a man through a woman's eyes. And all his actions and all his dialogue and his behavior doesn't make any sense. Because if you're a man and you become clairvoyant and you can hear what people think, at some point you become a superhero. Because that's how men view themselves. We want to improve the world. We want to save the world. We want to make the world a better place. That's the truth. That's why men go in the military. They don't get in the military to kill people and break things, because only psychopaths do that and they get weeded out. The men in the military want to be heroes. They want to save their country. They want to save lives. So when you get a superpower, you start testing your strength. You start to think, well, you know what? You start influencing women in positions of power, in positions of where you can have effect, and you would affect change in a positive way. That's what you would ultimately start doing after you've done all the selfish shit. That's what you go through in the early stages. Of course, you use it to get the chick you always wanted.
Yeah.
But at some point, a man, especially a guy like Nick, who's been around women all his life, who's very sympathetic to women. It doesn't take much. He just has to hear one thought of another woman.
Yeah.
Immediately his sympathetic feelings start kicking in. It's like, oh shit, I've been neglecting these women. I've been sort of abusing these women without knowing it. I've been an asshole. He starts fixing things. Right? That's the one thing I guess in retrospect makes him redeemable. The one thing they get right about a man is that, yes, we are very sympathetic, especially to women. So here's a guy who can hear women's thoughts. And to an extent, when he goes to the shrink, she actually explains this. It's like, well, you can answer the eternal question everyone's always asked. But I forgot about the shrink. And a real man in that situation would.
That's interesting. I think there's like a pretty big difference, as I'm hearing you talk about, between American and European men, perhaps. But he does, it's not malicious in the way that he is. It's just that he is so selfish, he doesn't give it a thought.
Yeah, because he's
to your point, when he learns, so when he hears it, he's like, oh my God, like this did not occur to me before.
Yeah, his mommy issues kick in.
Yeah.
He has mommy issues. His mom was hot. I can commiserate. My mom was attractive. His mom probably had to divide her attention between him and her sugar daddies that, they keep mentioning. Some of those sugar daddies actually taught him something, and those were assholes, so they taught him all the wrong things.
Yeah, those were the only men he had in his life.
But he had a ton of ersatz mothers. All those dancers, they were all treating him like he was a little king.
Yes.
So of course he's spoiled, or of course he thinks he's God given the women. That's basically the premise, which it kind of makes sense, but in reality, it wouldn't have ended up in an ad agency, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So he would be in a job like that. But, and here's the big but, and my big problem with this movie is that you don't hear what women think. You hear the motivating thought for their next action. And that's the problem. You don't hear what they think. It's not really true. Like when he has sex with Marisa Tomei, he reacts to everything, right? He does something, she reacts to it in her mind. He hears it, he adapts.
Yeah.
Right? So he's reacting to whatever motivates these women. So really, there's no deeper thought than that. Monsieur, I need to poop.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let the dog shit. That's basically the extent of his superpower. But they don't really go into this. They don't explain it. And they also don't explain the range. And that annoyed me even the most. Because he calls her on the phone and he can hear her thoughts.
Yeah. Over No, I thought the same thing. Like the phone. Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. What is his range? I mean, is that 2 feet? Is that a meter? Is that... the extent of a phone call? What?
You're putting way too much thought into a rom-com.
But I'm a man, and I'm a science geek. Yeah, and that kind of stuff drives me nuts while I'm watching a movie.
They assume people aren't gonna
like this can't happen. I need suspension of disbelief.
I'm with you on that.
I hate you, Nancy Myers. You should have done a better job.
But like outside of that, I don't really want to hear someone that I might be attracted to say, think, she's fat, or, she's ugly. She's whatever. Or my boss thinking negative thing. Like, I don't want, that's too much. My brain can't handle that.
Exactly. And the real joke is that usually you think things that are completely unrelated to the situation when you're talking to someone. At least I am. That's kind of, to me, that's funny. When you're talking to a person and you're saying something very meaningful, and that person is thinking of his laundry list.
Yeah, like, what am I going to have for lunch today?
Yeah. Right? That would be funny to me. They didn't go there.
Yeah, they didn't at all. I was thinking there was one instance of it, but no, you're right. They didn't.
Yeah, the only time they played with it was with his secretaries, which are these 2 brainless women.
Yeah, why does he have 2 secretaries? Also,
I have no idea. And why would they be unattractive and middle-aged?
I know. Yeah.
Nonsense. If this was Nick Marshall, I mean, he has a fairly attractive personal assistant, and there are attractive women in that ad agency. He would have hot secretaries. Inevitably. Yeah.
No way in heck. I mean, he has to be a VP to have 3 people serving him at least.
I kind of understand why that company is going down the tubes.
Yeah.
There's way too many people in that office.
Would you have liked this movie better if there were different actors playing Nick and...
that's interesting. I thought about that. And that's because I'm a big Marisa Tomei person. I think they should have switched the 2. I think Marisa Tomei had way better chemistry with Mel Gibson if they'd kept Mel Gibson, and that would have worked better. Not that I don't like Helen Hunt. I've seen her in lots of stuff she's great in, but she did not work for me in this movie.
I feel similarly about Helen Hunt. There's nothing wrong with her, but I feel like that person should be a little sexier. So like a Robin Wright or Sharon Stone type, maybe.
Sure. Yeah.
Marisa Tomei.
More a lot more aloof.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas she seems very accessible.
Now, Marisa Tomei, I'm not sure she works in a like, I'm this like super powerful woman role. She seemingly is better at like bubbly, cutesy, eccentric types. Or am I typecasting her perhaps?
Perhaps she did do theater.
Yeah.
And she did win an Oscar.
True. That's true. I really like her.
I think she's a very serious actress that has been criminally underutilized.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because did you watch A Different World when you were a kid?
Yeah. Oh, I forgot she was in that. I totally forgot. She was
like the first actress that I had an infatuation with that I learned the name of. Purposely learned,
really?
Who is this person? I need to know who this person is. Marisa Tomei. And then she would show up in other movies. And I was like, Marisa Tomei.
Yeah. Yeah. She's great. She
was so funny on that show. I have powerful memories of it because of Marisa Tomei. And they were all funny. It was that show had good chemistry.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. Despite being a Cosby Show spinoff.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then you get with Mel. Is Mel essential to this movie?
No. Yeah, I mean, I know this is a Mel Gibson podcast, but I don't think he's essential to this particular movie.
No, and that's, essential in the sense that he produced it. It was his company that produced this movie. So it's still a Mel Gibson movie. And it's great that he picked it to flex his comedy muscles. Because I do think he's funny. He did not fail in this movie. Yeah, he's really
I agree.
Charming and funny and kind of an asshole. And he's just Mel. And on that note, we should end What Women Want.
Indeed.
Katie, thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yes, we get to talk about something else than Rocky.
Yes.
So tell me, Katie, what's next for you?
Well, so I'm a co-host, lucky enough to be able to co-host with Ryan Rebalkin and Kyle Peterson of the Going the Distance, the Rocky and Creed series podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We just ended. We're done. Finito with Creed 2. But the exciting news is that we are now starting this week. We're starting the new podcast from the beginning, the classic Academy Award winning 1976 Rocky. And the new podcast that we will cover Rocky through Rocky 6, AKA Rocky Balboa, is
all the real Rockies.
Yes.
None of that Creed nonsense.
Exactly. And what is we just started the new podcast, or we're starting it, and it is One More Round. It took me a minute to remember. One More Round, the Rocky series podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find us on the Last of the Action Heroes podcast network, on any of your however you listen to podcasts, or Google us. And then we are on Facebook and Twitter. We just rebranded the pages because Ryan also does, he's going to be doing a Rambo podcast. So it is called the Rocky and Rambo podcast page. So that's where you can find us. I hope you check us out, everyone that likes Mel. Sylvester's pretty awesome too.
Great. Thanks a lot, Katie.
Thank you.